Okay, she's recording. Hold on. Hi everybody, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like my video if you like watching them. I've got a story here about the United States postal system, the post office. There's been talks going on in Washington, D.C. intermittently all my life about the post office. And most of it centers around how much money they're having to give the post office every year because they're running a deficit. This last year, fiscal year 2024, the post office brought in about $28 billion in revenue, but they were $9 billion in deficit. Most of my life they've been in deficit. A lot of the old people say, well, no, the post office used to pay for itself. Well, no, it didn't. Because what they're talking about is the day when they had a second budget. You know, they had one for building post offices. They had another one for buying vehicles, the delivery vehicles and semi-trucks and the fuel for them on another budget item. So they weren't paying for themselves. Nowadays, they don't do that anymore. It's just they fund an appropriation that funds everything with the post office at one time, so there's not 3 or 4 bills or supplementals going in to keep the post office running. But our post office is, from what my research said, it's actually been losing big bucks since 1946, after the war was over. And before that happened, like I said, the buildings and the vehicles and the fuel and all that stuff was getting funded off separate items than the regular post office budget. It was all semantics, in other words. They were doing that so the post office could say they paid for themselves. That was a big thing they used to say. Except for they didn't pay for themselves, because they didn't pay for the bricks and mortar, they didn't pay for the cars, didn't pay for the fuels, and anything else outside of the basic running of the buildings and the paychecks for the mail personnel. So, no, it never really paid for itself on its own. Now, that's a little disturbing, because I lived in England where the post office actually made a bunch of money for the government. But their post office, which was pretty fast and worked pretty good, did not work like our post office here. Like, they didn't have post office buildings for you to go to like we have here in Battle Creek. We got a big post office downtown. It's got a whole bunch of mailboxes. No, we didn't have that, okay? They didn't have that in England. You went to businesses that had they ran like a little mini post office inside of their business, and a lot of them had it. You would go in there and buy your stamps. They had postal boxes similar to the blue boxes we got in this country, but theirs were red and had the royal crest on them and stuff like that. But if you had a package to send, you'd go up to that business. Might be a hardware store, might be a grocery store, could be anything. But in Britain, a lot of the stores had the post section that was run by people that had nothing to do with the post office. They made a couple cents off of each stamp they sold. They made, a quid or two off every package that was sent. But the post office would come around to all those every morning and pick up the mail that was there, basically. And all of the trucks and that were used by the post office were all contracted vehicles. The post office in England basically didn't own any delivery vehicles. And if you lived in the country, they gave you a mailbox. They had like a post office, but it was an office that didn't have any people who worked there. You had a combination box, like you might have box 42. A friend of mine lived in the country, had box 42. You just walk into this place that had a bunch of boxes in it, go up and put in your combination, get your mail out, and go. Now, if you had a package coming to you, they had a contractor that delivered the packages in the country. And it was a pretty good system that they had. But their post office made hundreds, back in the 80s, made hundreds of millions of dollars worth of profit for the government, not cost money. In the cities, the people walked around with the mail bag delivering the mail. If they had further ones out, they would have the same bag or a box on the back of a bicycle, and they would take a bicycle out to some point and then go out and start delivering, in the city area. They would do that around some of the bigger villages as well. But the British made money on their postal system. The Germans made money on their postal service. The Filipinos made money off their postal system. I don't know about all the postal systems in the world, but the three I was the most familiar with made money, whether it was First World or Third World. But in the United States, we can't be efficient. And delivering to rural areas far out away from major postal service centers doesn't make any sense. There's no way to make that efficient or profitable running all those miles. When you have a city like I live in where people are close together and you can just go delivering a poof, poof, poof to mailboxes one right after the other, basically. Yeah, you can make money off that, but now we're having a conversation about privatizing the USPS. And I believe that if the government, after all these years, cannot make it profitable, or at least breaking even, that we can't operate like we have been. We cannot, like in the case of Battle Creek, we drive 20 miles away trying to deliver a letter. Well, you can't do that. At some point in time, you got to smarten up. That's not going to work, okay? And privatizing it is a way, I think, a good way to go ahead and maybe make it profitable, or make the company who does the contract take it, pay if they don't become